I have been reading stock car racing since I found my very first copy of it in a newsstand underneath the elevated train line on Fulton Street in Brooklyn. I was a regular contributor to Stock Car and Open Wheel, and Hemmings was looking for an editor. And I climb into the car, and Rusty's in the seat just looking at me. And the person who had ridden in it before me was a very diminutive young female TV reporter, and I couldn't get the belts around me. Watching the field line up 4 wide for the A main at the Knoxville Nationals on the final night, and know you've just seen the most competitive qualifying in motorsport anywhere in the world, and throw up a clod of dirt about this big that would smack you right in the chest, which happened to me. The guy who beat Mario Andretti that night was Jim Hendrickson, who became a legend in modified stock cars on Long Island. Flemington Speedway, the most magical, unforgettable, exciting, compelling, filthy, dangerous, loud, eternally mobbed weekly racetrack I ever experienced. I mean, I saw cars get into the stands there several times. As a Hemmings senior editor, I was a frequent guest co-host on Ron Ananian's program, The Car Doctor. And I also am a more regular guest on In the Pits Radio. Your word is really what you are. It's not a thing, it's not a commodity, it's your being, it's your core.
Jeff Stearns, connected through cars. If they're bigwigs, we'll have them on the show. And yes, we'll talk about cars and everything else. Here he is now, Jeff Stearns.
Jeff Stearns, connected through cars with my new friend, Jim Donnelly. I'm extremely excited and honored to have Jim on here. I want to read from my notes, so if you see me reading, what a background in the automotive space. So, multiple award-winning author and researcher of automotive and motorsports history, more than 30 years of diversified writing and broadcast and lecturing. Hope that he lectures us here a little bit today. International assignments, award-winning, whether it be local or national or worldwide, globally published photography. Very, 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 very interesting. And then we're talking about, prior to us saying hi and introducing, about some of the automotive events. I mean, Jim, first of all, let's just start with, just based on our prior conversation that the audience didn't hear, how many automotive events do you, like, what's your schedule like? How many automotive events are you going to a year?
In a normal year, it can change from day to day, literally. My schedule this week, in addition to working with you, involves working on a story for Crankshaft magazine about the Briggs Cunningham commissioned rebodied Cadillac, I guess is the most succinct description of it. It's famously known as the Monster, and it ran at Le Mans in 1950 and managed an 11th place finish after Briggs Cunningham managed to stuff it into a sandbank at the end of Busan, and thereby regretted his decision not to follow Phil Walter's advice and equip each car with a shovel. I guarantee he never made that mistake again. And I'm active in the local motorsports community down here. I'm an elector and sometime researcher for the Motorsports Hall of Fame of America, which is about 3 miles away from here at Daytona International Speedway, having been moved there a few years ago from Novi, Michigan. I'm active with the Motor Racing History Associates, which is led in great measure by my friend Buzz McKim, who is the founding director of the NASCAR Hall of Fame in Charlotte. That position now being held by my friend Tom Jensen, a former contributor to Speed Sport like myself, although I'm a current contributor. I've recently begun writing for Performance Racing Industry magazine. As I said, I write for Hemmings. I'm lead writer for the Hemmings auctions.
Oh, and let me interrupt you about Hemmings. If I'm not mistaken, you do 4 titles. And we met, by the way. I mean, the way I found you was...
There's more than that, but we'll get to that.
Okay. If we're going to get to that, that's great, because I'm really curious about that. And how I found you and became your fan and not quite groupie was Crankshaft.
Okay.
As a matter of fact. Yeah.
Okay. I guess biographically, after being raised in Brooklyn, New York, where my exposure to cars was largely dominated by salivating over Michael Abbracciamento's Gold with white wall tires. I remember 1965, I think it was, Series 1 E-Type 2+2, first one I'd ever seen. He also owned a 1963 Buick Riviera that was also painted gold. My parents moved to southern New Jersey outside Philadelphia in 1968, and I was largely raised there through my adolescence and teen years. And once I graduated college, I actually worked in law enforcement there briefly and pivoted into journalism and worked for a local daily newspaper in a highly competitive market for 22 years, developing, in addition to my reporting and editing duties that I held at various times, developing a readership base, I guess I should say, by covering both new cars and motorsports in addition to my regular duties.
What year, what era, please?
I worked there full time from 1980 to 2002. In that period of time, I became acquainted with Dr. Dick Berggren, who was then the editor of Stock Car Racing and also just as famously Open Wheel magazine, which he founded. And I had been reading Stock Car Racing since I found my very first copy of it in a newsstand underneath the elevated train line on Fulton Street in Brooklyn in 1968. And I can tell you exactly which issue it was. It was the one with David Pearson and the Hallman Moody Torino in the pits at what I think was Rockingham. Dick and I corresponded for a while before he encouraged me to contribute articles to his magazine, and then later encouraged me to pick up a camera for the first time. And I was a regular contributor to Stock Car and Open Wheel for the rest of their existences, including being named to their coverage team for the Knoxville Nationals. That's still one of my proudest accomplishments in journalism, was getting to cover Knoxville for Open Wheel. It was a wonderful experience, and that's when I thought I'd truly arrived as a journalist, regardless of whatever I'd done at the newspaper. I was actually covering the greatest sprint car race and the greatest short track event in the world. It was a good feeling. Yeah, that was my benchmark. That's my yardstick. The clips that I accumulated from Dick and from working at the newspaper, where I was fortunate enough, as I've been throughout my career, to have been mentored by some very skillful and generous people, led me to discover that Hemmings was looking for an editor. I can't sit here and tell you really definitively that I was really willing to make a change or preparing to make a change, especially one that involved moving to Vermont. But I did. I was able immediately to start photographing cars in magazine quality layouts and writing about them in depth. And I stayed with Hemmings until I accepted an early retirement in 2017. And I've stayed with them. I'm still a contributor to them. I don't have the title senior editor anymore, but that's okay, because I am the lead writer for their newly established auction site, which is doing a fabulous business with a sell-through rate that's close to 90%, and writing about an enormous number of highly unusual cars in the process, ranging from an all-original Chrysler Airflow down to a 1966 Fiat 1600 that was the two-seat sports car. Well, this guy in Miami, who was apparently an electrical engineer, jerry-rigged the thing into an EV with a battery pack between the frame rails. And he's driving this car around. He offered it with a $9,000 reserve on it. Somebody bought it, too.
I'm looking now, the 1600, the little cab. I mean, just the little...
Exactly. Some guy living in Miami converted one of those things into an EV. In fact, he brought it over. He imported it from Italy. He was from Italy, relocated to Miami, brought the car with him, apparently somehow worked in the tech industry down there, and converted it into an EV in his driveway and found a buyer. God bless him.
God bless him. Well, I do get a look at that Hemmings auction a lot, and it's amazing how these online, I would have never predicted it 10 years ago that cars would be setting records the way they are, and the sell-through rate. You mentioned Hemmings having a 90% sell-through rate on these auctions. That's incredible, where you can't go, to me, where you can't go, I would have never predicted, where you can't go inspect the car.
Yeah, but that's the power of Hemmings. I learned that very early in my career there. I learned two things when I first showed up in Vermont, in Bennington. Actually, three things, which was that the Blue Ben is a great diner that makes tremendous triple berry pancakes. I learned that first. A little bit later, I also learned that Hemmings, as a brand, enjoys enormous credibility because it's always been true to what it is, and it's always been a trusted source of information for people who want to buy either an entire old car or just a little piece of it. So it follows then logically that by entering the world of auctions, they're going to bring some of that credibility along baked into their product. And by God, it's been working out wonderfully.
All right, so I'm definitely not trying to be argumentative. I want to talk to you about, what Bring a Trailer is doing, what Cars and Bids is doing. I'm just amazed at the online auction space, and I believe that Hemmings is the granddaddy, no doubt.
Actually, we're really a latecomer, but we're bringing a value system with us that is well demonstrated, well proven, and well respected in the world we inhabit.
Well put. Well put. Now, you're a New York automotive journalist, but you seem a little young.
New Jersey. I was born in Brooklyn. I was raised in New Jersey. I identify as a New Jerseyan.
Wow. Okay. And that's funny because most people in New Jersey that went to New York one time would rather say they're from New York. So I'm proud of you for that.
See this shirt under my Knoxville Raceway shirt? This is a Philadelphia Eagles shirt. Just saying.
Okay. So this is going to lead me to ask, do you know Marty Shore?
Absolutely. I know him well. He was my media contact with Buick for more than 20 years. And he took me on one of the most exciting. It wasn't even a press introduction. It was a fantastic program that they put on at Phoenix International Raceway, which was not a new model rollout, but it was just a recognition of what they've done they had done in both production cars and motorsports with the turbocharged V6. I got to drive one of the last Buick GNXs ever built. At the same event, I got to get taken on a lap around the track in the Grand National with Jim Crawford, who once held the track record in Indianapolis. And I also got taken down the pit lane in a super stock, I think, G automatic Grand National driven by Kenny Duttweiler, the master of the turbocharged Buick V6. I'm told there's a photo of me riding in that car in the right seat when it launched, with my head down or my chin down somewhere around the lap belt buckle.
Riding in a passenger seat with a professional driver on a track can be, to me, very hairy. Were you used to it and okay with it? I could never stand it. Like, I'm thinking I'd be braking right now. I'd be braking right now when you're in the passenger seat.
I had never experienced a launch in what was probably close to 1,000 horsepower super stocker with 588 or 620 gears. But I will tell you this, that at a 1 mile track in Nazareth, Pennsylvania, which was directly next door to the 1/2 mile track in Nazareth, Pennsylvania, at the time known as Pennsylvania International Raceway and owned by Roger Penske. I got taken around in an IROC car as a passenger to Rusty Wallace. There was a little bit of a problem. You can only see me from the chest up here. I'm rather large. I wear like a size 46 suit.
Okay.
And I can bench press like a fair amount of weight and things like that. So I'm not svelte by any stretch.
Okay.
Nobody's going to mix me up with one of the gymnasts in Tokyo right now. That said, I get into the car. I climb in through the passenger window because there was no window. They'd taken out. It's an IROC. At that point, they were probably still Camaros. They hadn't switched to Dodge yet. And I climb into the car, and Rusty's in the seat just looking at me. And the person who had ridden in it before me was a very diminutive young female TV reporter from one of the Allentown stations. And I couldn't get the belts around me. I couldn't do it. I mean, they were like 4 or 5 inches short. I mean, somebody would have had taken a machete to me to get them to fit. So I just look over at Rusty, and he looks over at me, and I said, you know what? I said, just go. I trust you. I said, let's go fast. And he did. He gave me like 7 laps, each one deep and breaking more deeply than the other, which at that track was kind of a challenge because Nazareth was actually a 5-cornered oval that ran uphill and downhill pretty severely. And it had originally been a dirt track that measured 1 1/8 miles to the lap. After it went bankrupt, Roger bought it, so he had a place to test his Indy cars. And they had a lot of good races there under his tutelage and also under NASCAR's tutelage. But I was dumb enough to get in the car and tell Rusty Wallace, yeah, go out and scare me, man.
Did you get scared or not? I mean, even though you're trying to be cool or intellectually you understand that he's a professional, but I mean, do you get scared?
My credo is you only die once, so who cares? You can only get hurt for so long. Yeah, I wasn't scared. I figured what's going to happen is going to happen. I said, don't worry, I ain't going to sue you.
Well, I can't really see your build, but you mentioned, you're not svelte. We're not going to mix you up with a Tokyo gymnast, and you can bench press quite a bit. But so far, on 2 references in a short time, you talked about the best pizza in town and the best pancakes in town. So, I could have made a guess anyway.
I'm 6'2" and about 260 pounds, which is larger than most race drivers are.
Yes. And, it's funny. I had another show with a fellow named Don Hedizian, who's an ex-Ferrari exec, Bentley exec, and he did some laps with Derek Bell in the passenger seat. And I don't remember what kind of car.
Just saw him in Amelia Island. He looks great. Yeah, I'd love to have an experience like that.
Well, it's funny because he said that making some turn, Derek missed the apex a little. And then after he missed it, he asked Don, what do you weigh? And Don said 230 or, whatever he said. And he said, okay. And the next time around, he did it perfect. And your story reminded me of it because the prior passenger in the car was somebody's teenage daughter that, may have been 100 pounds. But to me, I was amazed at the story because when I drive, I can't make a difference between something in my trunk or not or the size of the passenger. But imagine being able to do the calculation. There's 150 pound difference in the passenger seat.
Yeah. And Rusty, Rusty and I kind of knew each other already. I mean, he knew who I was and I knew who he was, obviously. And the whole thing was played for laughs. But I had another experience at a new car introduction that truly did scare the living hell out of me. And that took place in probably 1990 when the Audi 80 and 90, as they were then called, were introduced. I mean, so basically we're talking about essentially an upgraded Volkswagen Passat here. They had the introduction at Bridgehampton Raceway in Long Island, which had been closed for a considerable time already. At least as far as pro-level motorsports goes. I think they were still actually having some club events there, but that was the absolute limit of it. So Audi rents this place out, and they fly us in. They flew me from Philadelphia to Islip, New York, and I just remember it was a really long time to get to the track. When I got there, they went through the normal introduction, and then they introduced the driver who was going to take us for laps around this place, and the driver was Doc Bundy. Doc Bundy was one of the top guns in the IMSA GTP series, so he was used to I know he drove for the Corvette IMSA GTP program. So you're talking a twin turbo V6 here with probably on the order of 900 horsepower. And Bridgehampton was a very, in terms of safety and other facilities, I guess you'd call it, Bridgehampton was really primitive. First of all, it was a disused racetrack. And secondly, it was built in an era where there was no consideration for either participant or spectator safety. And Doc gets me in the right seat and just goes absolutely flat to the mat around this place in an Audi 90 Quattro. And I really thought I was going to die. I really did. That was a scary, it was scary in an entertaining kind of way. And I trusted Doc because he was obviously a proven world-class race driver. But to be put in that position when you're totally helpless is, I guess it must in some ways parallel with feeling what being born must feel like.
I don't know anyone that's comfortable in the passenger seat, in these race situations. I was actually talking to Derek Bell about that on one of these shows, and I said, just tell me the truth. Are you okay in the passenger seat or not? He said no. And he understands what's going on.
No. I managed to scare myself pretty thoroughly on one of those events, and it was a short lead Chevy introduction in 1996 that was at Road America. And they brought a bunch of experimental engineering bucks for us to drive, but I got to take out a Corvette Grand Sport, and it was a new model that year, if you remember it, with the chevron type stripes on the front fenders. And they have a succession of people who are waiting to get inside the car and do at least one lap in it, including myself. So I get aboard this thing and head out of the pits. And I'm going down on my very first lap. I'm going down the long back straight at Elkhart Lake, which, as you might know, ends in about a 110-degree left-hand first gear corner.
Treacherous.
Yeah, and I'm about 2/3 of the way down the straightaway, just like legging. I was probably running about 140. And I tapped the brakes, and nothing happened. So I tapped them again, and nothing happened that time either. So by this time, I'm trying to squeeze the brake pedal down to the floor with my left foot while I've just got my other foot in the throttle, and the pedal's just going straight to the floor. I got no brakes. There's nothing. The pedal's like completely useless.
So when did you decide to take your right foot off the gas?
Right about then. And I managed to like gently squeeze the emergency brake enough to scrub off some speed to the point where I could actually safely downshift the thing without locking up the back wheels and throwing me into the spin. And it wasn't too elegant, but I did manage to make it around the corner in one piece and went straight to the pits and just parked the car. I said, this thing's done. And it was. They didn't use it again that day. Boiled the brake fluid right out of it.
The no brakes thing. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that was no fun. But most of the rest of it was.
You're able to extract the positive.
Oh, always. In my career, I've driven a lot of cool cars, did what at least I think is some good and responsible journalism about cars and a lot of other things. Was fortunate enough to be trained and mentored by some really good people. Saw some tremendous racing and saw some of the greatest people the sport has ever seen, most talented and brave and skillful drivers to ever turn a wheel. Watched them at the peak of their powers, got to write about it, got to meet them. Hey, I have no complaints.
For those of us not in your business, trying to think about this through your eyes, you've had to have been some extremely interesting places around the world. If you just had to tick off 4 or 5 of them, places you've been and what was so interesting about it or romantic about it or impressive about it or you wouldn't believe because it's so low key. I mean, what?
Here, I'll tell you a good story. When I was at Hemmings, for most of the time I was there, we typically, at least once a year, had a cruise for our readers. And one year, that cruise took us all around the Mediterranean, which included a stop in Monaco. And I got to walk the circuit, which was nice. In the process of walking it, I did 3 things. Number one, I got invited aboard some presumably Arabic guy's yacht, which had a Bell Jet Ranger helicopter on the deck. I was just wandering around. He invited me to come aboard. So I did. The next thing that happened was I went to a coffee shop across from the casino, the famous casino along the course, and I paid $12 for a cup of coffee. It's the most money I ever spent for a cup of coffee in my life, and it wasn't even that great a cup of coffee. I got a better cup from Dunkin' this morning. That happened. And then while I was walking from the guy's yacht to the coffee shop, I passed 2 places. One of which was where you could hire a Ferrari F430, which I believe was a new car back then. You know, open seat, mid-engine, megabuck exotic, and get taken around the course. Not drive, but get taken as a passenger around the course in this thing. 1 lap, 330 euros. Next, on the way to the coffee shop, I pass a cafe. Like most places in France, unlike the United States, you go by a restaurant, there's a menu outside. I took a picture of the menu. It's on my portable hard drive because on it they had a cheeseburger for 32 euros. You know how much that costs you know how much that was in 2011? About $40. So you could get it. You can go to Monaco and get a cheeseburger for $40
With a $12 cup of coffee. Perfect.
and with a $12 cup of coffee. You know, I mean, in that town, you know, liquor is literally cheaper than coffee. So that's one story. But I say that kind of humorously because I can add to that story by saying what moves me? Watching the field line up 4 wide for the A main at the Knoxville Nationals on the final night and know you've just seen the most competitive qualifying in motorsport anywhere in the world. No race is harder to qualify for than the Knoxville Nationals. Or to stand on the balcony at the media center, the Pagoda at Indianapolis, and watch the crowd stand up and scream as one when they come down to take the green, which no TV image properly captures. It can't. Or to stand on what race fans call Beer Hill. It literally is a hill. It overlooks Turn 3 at Williams Grove Speedway, and have somebody who would be a good guy to do this. Let's say Keith Kaufman when he was still driving, the man from Mifflintown, who would drive deep into the cushion and stick his right rear in there full throttle and throw up a clod of dirt about this big that would smack you right in the chest, which happened to me. Okay, that's fun. That's enjoyable.
So how about a road course, though, Jim? How long can you watch a road course race where you're standing at your corner waiting every 4.5 minutes or whatever for your car to come around?
Depends on the road course. I've asked myself that question more than once because I'd like to go to Le Mans, and I'm wondering what kind of a spectator experience.
Your car comes around about every 4.5 minutes at Le Mans.
Yeah, well, it's more than that because I just was exchanging emails with a gentleman in France named Graham Gould, who's a journalist, and I just bought Graham Robeson's history of Cosworth from him. He advertised in a Facebook group for auto racing book collectors. Anyway, he said to get credential for Le Mans, basically, you have to have a full fire suit to get anywhere into the Parc Fermé or anything like that. My road course experiences, however, include places like Lime Rock Park, where it's hugely fun to watch a race, especially if you get a big pack of cars trying to negotiate Big Bend at once and then head down the hill under the bridge. It's not going to take them 4 minutes to get back. Maybe the teachable lesson here is that in many cases, a shorter course tends to produce more readily digestible racing that you can consume all at once with a smile on your face.
Don't argue that at all. And speaking of Le Mans, Derek Bell was named, he'll be Grand Marshal at the upcoming Le Mans. That was just announced. So
very fitting choice.
Yeah, good for him.
Yeah.
Good for him. So I'm going to look at, I don't have to look at my notes. There's some things I didn't want to forget to ask about. One of the things when we were talking, cars and trucks in Brooklyn.
Aside from Mike Bracciamento's Jaguar, my actual earliest exposure to auto racing is linked to Brooklyn, which once used to have a very famous board speedway in Sheepshead Bay, and where Ralph De Palma, who lived in Brooklyn for a very long time, was a frequent winner. When I was a kid, I can remember I used to go. My father went away to sea because he was an engine room officer aboard oil tankers. He had served in what's commonly called the Merchant Marine during World War II, and followed and was a mariner all his life. So he was gone for extended periods, and I was kind of the man of the house. When I would go shopping for my mother, which, believe it or not, included buying cartons of cigarettes from the Key Food when I was about 6 years old and bringing them home to her, I have vivid memories of a still in service chain drive AC Mack, the legendary Mack Bulldog, with a huge steak body on it, bringing crates of vegetables. And back then, that's what they were in. They were actually in wooden crates that were nailed shut and bailed up with wire. And he would bring them to this Key Food supermarket on Liberty Avenue and just offload them. He was, if I had to guess, he was most likely coming from where most produce in the New York metro area comes from today, the Hunts Point Market in the South Bronx. This truck had an open exhaust with an exit pipe that was probably, this big around, and no muffler. And it had pneumatic tires. I do recall seeing some solid tire trucks still as a kid growing up. That wasn't one of them. But when he actually cranked that engine after they offloaded the crates into the back loading dock of the supermarket, it just echoed off the buildings. And down a few blocks away from there was, I'll tell you what, I can even show it to you. I can go to the filing cabinet, was the firehouse that dated back to the 1860s, where this company was based, this fire truck I'm showing you right now. It was Engine 236 on Liberty Avenue. And in those days, that engine company used a Ward LaFrance pumper, which also had an open exhaust and completely obviated the need for a siren on a truck, because you could hear that thing coming down the street from the minute they pulled it out of the apparatus bay. By the way, the firehouse had a keystone over the apparatus door. It was a single bay firehouse. It dated back to the horse-drawn era, but the building was so old. It's still in use. It's still an active New York City firehouse. There's a B engraved in the keystone, and that stands for Brooklyn Fire Department. So the building actually predated the organization of FDNY into a single agency, which was in 1865. So that was a great thing to see. And my mother was originally from a little town between Johnstown and Altoona in Pennsylvania. And typically once a year we'd head out there to visit. And it was, to me, it was so long, it might as well have been a lunar mission, even though it was probably only about a 5-hour drive. Going down the Pennsylvania Turnpike and looking up at these Macks and Peterbilts and Internationals, and also what the German-built Kassbrauder motor coaches, custom motor coaches that Continental Trailways used back then, the first Silver Eagle buses, and hearing the rumble of their diesels and smelling the smoke from their exhausts and watching them just arc by and wondering where they were going. It put me on a journey that has never ended.
Yes, it really hasn't ended.
It was a wonderful place, and I never know where my destination is, and that's half the fun.
That's fabulous. Which I think we talked about, but you tell me. And we can edit, leave things in, leave things out. But we were talking about discovering motorsport, Langhorne, East Windsor, etc. Did we sort of cover that, or should we talk about that?
No, actually we didn't, because we kind of touched on it, because this actually involves a Brooklyn story too. One day when I was a kid, I was probably going to Zip's candy store. A candy store is something that's in every Brooklyn neighborhood. You get egg cream, you get cigarettes, you get candy, you get newspapers, and some you get a bet down. And I was walking down there and or riding my bicycle, and all of a sudden I saw going the opposite way, going eastbound on Liberty Avenue, which led to the parkways heading out Long Island. Saw a pickup truck hauling what was a 1949 to 51 Ford. Totally gutted out, painted red and yellow, including with the disc wheels half painted yellow and half painted red on opposite sides. If I remember right, it was number 71. I didn't know what to make of it, except it excited me, and it was gone just as quickly as I saw it. Much later, I found out that he was probably heading toward a track called Freeport Stadium, which was out Sunrise Highway, not far from New York City, probably realistically about a half hour away, and where I'm actually writing today about a driver who started his career there. His name was Ted Tappet.
Okay.
And he was a midget driver, and under his given name, Phil Walters, he was America's first true post-war road racing star and was a mentor to a very young Dan Gurney. I also found out much later that New York City had a stock car track, which very few people know about. It was a little either 1/5 or 1/6 mile oval on Staten Island called Weissglass Stadium. I think it was named after the neighborhood because there was also a Weissglass Dairies on Staten Island for a very long time. And it was kind of near the Bayonne Bridge that went over into New Jersey. I didn't know this track existed until well after I moved to New Jersey. The track closed. But one of the big guns at that track was a guy named Buddy Loreno, whose son, Roger, later became a major dirt modified star in New Jersey, and whom I saw just barely lose a Flemington 200 to Billy Pouch one year. Buddy Loreno was the big star of Weissglass Stadium. When we moved to New Jersey, one time we were driving on the turnpike, and near Exit 8 in Heightstown was a junked, I shouldn't say junked, it was junked at that time, but it was a junked 37 or 36 Ford Coupe. And it was painted red and white, and it was up on a berm along the northbound lanes. And I managed to get a glimpse of it. It said stock car racing, East Windsor Speedway, Friday night, 7:30 p.m. And I managed to find Area Auto Racing News, which was already doing a good business, in one of the local grocery stores around where we lived. And I did find an ad for East Windsor in there. And my father took me, and it was like nothing I'd ever seen before in my life. They were pre-war coupes and sedans coupled with these wildly chopped up Ford Mustangs and Ford Falcon bodied open wheel cars that were blasting at each other on a dirt track, crabbed sideways, full contact racing, every car different from every other car back then. No Pinto bodies yet. The Pinto was still a few years away, and I was just absolutely throttled by it. I mean, it was one of those moments in your life where you know your life is never going to be the same again. It had that level of power on me.
It was your destiny moment. It was your life before that and your life after that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the life before it, I basically, it's nothing I even really think that much about anymore, because before that, it really didn't matter. That's what gave it meaning for me. And we found Langhorne Speedway completely by accident. You see, what you have to understand, Jeff, is I grew up in New York City, and I had no idea any of this stuff existed, because there was no source of information on any of this that was circulated in the city. I mean, you had to go to New Jersey, or maybe even to Freeport. You had to go to a track and find a newspaper like Area Auto Racing News or like National Speed Sport News to just be aware that this entire universe of short track racing all over the country, which you were totally oblivious about, even existed. I had no idea, because the only auto racing I had seen on TV was the edited clips from ABC's Wide World of Sports, and back then they almost never covered short track stuff. So the entire universe of racing in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, upstate New York, and points west, New England, I had no knowledge of it until I just stumbled on it all at once. And basically, my life just took an exit ramp there and just kept right on going, and still going.
That was the destiny moment.
I guess. Yeah. Forces beyond me controlled that. I was just along for the ride.
So what about East Windsor, Flemington, Bridgeport?
New Jersey, as it exists today, there's no other way to express this. It's a very hostile environment for anybody who wants to be an auto racer. Within the past 2 weeks, I wrote a story for Speed Sport, for which I'm now a regular contributor, on the history of a little tiny speedway called Pine Brook Stadium that used to exist on Route 46, right on the border of Morris and I guess that's Passaic counties, a little bit west of New York City, on what is today a major shopping strip. Very dense suburban housing around it. Well, back then, they ran three-quarter midgets on Friday nights, and the fourth race meet they ever held, the guy who placed second in the feature was Mario Andretti. And I think the guy, I would have to look at the story text to remember, but I believe I'm right in saying this, so please bear with me. The guy who beat Mario Andretti that night was Jim Hendrickson, who became a legend in modified stock cars on Long Island at places like Freeport and like Islip Speedway and Riverhead Raceway, which is still operational today. Pine Brook could not survive in that environment. The land underneath it was just too valuable and too highly taxed to support a seasonal activity like auto racing, especially what, let's face it, is a fringe of auto racing aimed at a highly focused audience. East Windsor was a very nice, beautifully maintained, I need to make that very clear, by Don Jones and his family, beautifully maintained half-mile dirt track in an area that's only, I'm doing the math mentally right now, I'd say at the most 2 miles from a New Jersey Turnpike exit. Well, if you have vacant land in New Jersey it's 2 miles from a turnpike interchange, guess what happens? You're going to have an explosion of high-priced housing and high-priced retail to serve them. And that's what happened to East Windsor. All the land around there was carved up for these gentleman farmsteads where there's like, I don't know, 2,600 square foot colonial on a house on a land plot with a little barn and a rail fence where maybe you keep a pony or something like that. That's what ran the horsepower off, little horsepower. Flemington Speedway, the most magical, unforgettable, exciting, compelling, filthy, dangerous, loud, eternally mobbed weekly racetrack I ever experienced. It was a four-cornered square racetrack. So wherever you sat, assuming you were sitting in the stands, because they had no conventional media center there was no such thing. They had a big covered grandstand and bleachers going almost all the way around the track, and gates around it through which the race teams that were pitted in the infield would pull. And every program started out with the golden tones of Bill Singer saying, "Close all gates around the Speedway, please." If you went there, you would be inevitably sitting on the outside of a corner, because if you were going to take the track at any kind of racing speed, you were diamonding the corners to the point where the track was a circle now, not a square. And these guys were going absolutely flat out. I mean, in a sprint car, Flemington was a no-lift track. Doug Wolfgang, who I saw both win there and hit the wall so hard he broke a sprint car completely in two, called it the most frightening track he'd ever driven in his life. You were flat out. You could not see the exit to the corner as a driver, so you could go headlong into a pileup that you couldn't even see. And meanwhile, as far on the outside of the track, the fans are sitting in the stands getting absolutely, if you can imagine a blizzard of dirt being propelled at you by a gale force wind, that's what being in the stands at Flemington was like. People came there wearing goggles and with bandanas tied over their faces. I saw that. Okay. So you'd be there with these guys in big block modifieds going by you completely sideways, just a few feet away. And if somebody got into the fence there and flipped, which was usually good to happen about 2 or 3 times every single night, I mean, I saw cars get into the stands there several times.
Talk about a visceral experience. And
it was a big party because, I mean, if you spend enough time there, you would probably sooner rather than later realize, and I'm trying to put this as politely as I can, that a lot of the people in attendance there were not race fans. Are you reading me here? They were there to party. They were like Indianapolis snake pit type denizens who showed up at this track because there was no spectator gate. You bought your tickets when you drove onto the property, like a drag strip, and there was no spectator gate. So you parked in the lot and just walked to your seat. And these people will walk in there carrying like 2 and 3 cases of beer to get them through the night. And it was nuts. It was like Woodstock or like Altamont every Saturday night there. And when Flemington first paved and then closed, all those people just disappeared. I have no idea what happened to them. I can tell you they didn't show up at any of the other racetracks because I looked. They didn't show up at Orange County. They didn't show up at Grandview. They didn't show up at Wall Stadium to watch cars on asphalt because when Flemington closed, it was a paved track.
Well, what do you mean you looked? They didn't go to the others you looked? Like you're auditing who went to one or another?
Not auditing in the mathematical or accounting sense, but I mean, you could see if you walked through a spectator area, I mean, you had the same groups of fans have been coming for years to put their blankets on the seats in the same location.
Okay.
Years on end, and none of these checks. And also the reason I know is because I asked some of the promoters. I said, "Have you picked up any of the Flemington crowd?" I know I asked Bruce Rogers at Grandview that, and he goes, "No." He goes, "No, none of them." And a lot of that crowd did come from Pennsylvania. And I asked John Snyder, who covered the races at Orange County and did their PR for a lot of years, still does, as a matter of fact. John Snyder from Area Auto Racing News, very good columnist. I said, "John, are you getting any of these people?" "No, they disappeared. They found something else to do. Maybe they took up darts or something. I don't know."
Okay. Well, so that was a phenomena on its own that, like you said, not necessarily into the racing. It was just like a social experiment.
I got to go to Ascot once, Dick Berggren encouraged me to go there, and I was on an automotive event out there for Volkswagen. It was the introduction of the Jetta GLI, the first Jetta GLI. So this would be like 1988, 89. They let me drive one away from the event, which was held at Laguna Seca, and that's a fun place to drive. I'm certainly not going to claim any skill in the corkscrew, at least not that kind of corkscrew.
No, I've never driven Laguna Seca, but during Pebble, though, that's where the Monterey Historic's unbelievable.
Oh, yeah. One of the greatest automotive events in the world. The greatest. But I got to drive GLI away from this, and I ended up at Ascot for the Don Peabody Classic. First time I was ever in Los Angeles. Kerry Agajanian credentialed me, and I was wearing a Flemington T-shirt that night. I had people coming up to me in the stands and said, "Wow, you've been to Flemington?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "I live near there." And they said, "What's it like? Is it as wild as they say it is?" "Yeah." I said, "You only saw the part that got into the magazines." I said, "Imagine what the rest of it is like." Yeah, so it was a lot of fun. Yeah, Flemington was. I mean, it's one of these things in life that falls into the category of too good to last. It was an aesthetic triumph of dirt track racing, because to get around there quickly and stay out of trouble was not an easy thing to do. If you won a major race at Flemington, like the 200 lapper they had every year, or any World of Outlaws race that they had there, or URC sprint car race, that was an accomplishment. You definitely dodged a bullet, and any driver who raced there would tell you that. I mean, Billy Pouch won 114 modified features there. That tells me how good he is.
Amazing. How about, if you don't mind, talking about your radio and book career a little bit?
Let's take them in order, because I've done a number of. I've never attempted to do it on anything other than really what I'm doing here as a guest on somebody else's program. That said, I still enjoy it immensely. As a Hemmings senior editor, I was a frequent, really it got to the point where it was every other week, guest co-host on Ron Ananian's program, The Car Doctor, which at the time was carried on WOR-AM in New York City. That's a 50,000 watt clear channel station. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful experience. I say that a little wistfully and a little emotionally, because I grew up listening to that station as a kid in New York. My mother would have it on. I would listen to the Gamblings and Dr. Bernard Meltzer, and I can't think of the lady's name right now. She was on What's My Line. She had a program on there. But anyway, to be able to broadcast over those airwaves was a real point of pride. And I was humbled by it. I mean, I felt a link to those people that were a part of my past. I mean, I consider them part of my family because I heard their voices every day. Ron and I had a really good time with that program, and it lasted until I'm going to exercise some discretion here and not disclose the company, other than to characterize it as one of the major AM broadcast chains in the United States. They bought WOR from the family that owned it. It was a family-run radio station in New York City, believe it or not. Immediately fired the entire staff, all of which was local, including Ron, and even including the Gambling family, which had been on the station as on-air talent for 3 generations, going back really to when it first went on the air at the end of the 1920s. 3 full generations of the Gambling family. Well, so as Ron said, and I've always tried to remember, you haven't worked in radio until you've been fired in radio. So now I have been. I work for that station, and I still periodically contribute to the little AM station in Bennington, Vermont, WBTN, where my former Hemmings coworker David Nutter has an automotive show. It's a low-power station. When I lived across the line in New York State, I couldn't pick it up because the signal wasn't strong enough. But it's still a wonderful experience to be able to connect with an audience like that using just your words and the sound of your voice. More recently, I've been on it a couple of times, the Legends of Racing, a show that is hosted by Buzz McKim, like I said, was the founding director of the NASCAR Hall of Fame and is now my neighbor. We present that program when I'm on it. He presents the program, I should say, more accurately, from a restaurant called Racing's North Turn in Ponce Inlet, which is actually located on the former North Turn of the beach course. The turn's still there. And the paralleling stretch of Florida, State Route A1A, still has the pavement that the racers drove on. It still has the pavement dating back to the 50s. And I also am a more regular guest on In the Pits Radio, which is hosted by my friend and fellow Bishop Eustace Preparatory School graduate, Larry O'Donoghue, and formerly included among its cast members our late friend Dave Reininger, who was a very good automotive journalist, but more notably won the Indianapolis 500 twice as a team spotter, once for Dario Franchitti and once for Tony Kanaan. I have an enormous amount of fun on that show, talking about my newspaper past, my magazine present, my radio past and present. Larry and I, on the last broadcast we did 2 weeks ago, we spent about 10 minutes excoriating the memory of the French teacher of Bishop Eustace who flunked us both, Mr. Letrenaire. True story.
Should we talk about that?
Sure, if you like. We can talk about anything you like.
It sounds interesting.
What, Mr. Letrenaire flunking me? No, I'll tell you what. I'll tell you this. When I was in France, both for Hemmings and subsequently when my fiance and I were there on a river cruise to the Seine a couple of years ago, I'll say this. I mean, he may have flunked me, but what he did teach me stuck with me, because I was able to communicate there in France and be perfectly understood.
No kidding.
After all these years. Yeah, I graduated high school in 1974.
Well, that's incredible to me that you failed it and didn't have any reason to use it, and then enough of it stuck with you.
Yeah, I never even got a chance to really try it in Montreal. I shot a couple of cars in Quebec for Hemmings, but I never really tried to do it. I was there for other reasons, obviously. Yeah, I can speak it, read it, and write it.
That's incredible. And I mean, the fact that it worked at all in Quebec, where it's Quebecois French, not even France French. I'm
in Monaco, right? And I'll say this as delicately as I can. My now former wife and I decided to take a train ride up to Nice, next major stop north on SNCF, the National Railroad of France. I'm also a rail fan. I need to get that out. I love railroading. I love trains. I love model trains. I love reading about trains. And there's a Florida East Coast main line about 3/4 of a mile down the street here that I love listening to about 3 a.m. and I try to make sure I'm up to do it. Anyway, we're trying to find this. We're trying to find the train station in Monaco. I don't know where we're going. I mean, I know it. Okay, you can see the harbor. It's right there. I don't know where it is. So there's these two paramedics there with a medic unit, an ambulance. I walk up to these guys and say, "Excusez-moi, où est la guerre?" And oh, the train station? Yeah, it's right over there. You're right there. Just walk right. When we were actually in France, it's a little bit off topic because it's not really automotive subject-wise, although we went through a traffic rotary that said it was 14 kilometers away from Le Mans on the way to Normandy. I did much better when we were there in 2018 because I had a lot more ability to interact with people who just lived in the towns that we visited, including Almanches near Omaha Beach and Beauvais, which is where Van Gogh lived, and what else did we visit? We stayed in Paris for about a week. We also went to Rouen, and I actually had to find a pharmacy when I was there and get a painkiller for my fiance's back, and be able to communicate with the pharmacist while we were there. So it was nice to be able to carry it off.
It's really amazing that you retained it like that, honestly.
Yeah, and you know what? A lot of people really never get to experience another culture at all. A good way to start is to do it through cuisine. I mean, I was a believer in that. I'm certainly not going to equate myself to Anthony Bourdain, but his viewpoint that it's kind of a cultural gateway for a lot of people has certainly been my viewpoint for a long time. It's nice to be able to visit a foreign land and to be able to communicate with the people who live there in their native tongue, simply as a matter of respect, and show and a demonstration that you're interested enough in the world that they occupy to learn its language.
So you're not a typical American offended if someone can't speak English anywhere you go to help you out when you're lost.
Not at all, because I've had people help me out in other countries. I mean, I didn't just go to Monaco on that trip. We also went to Croatia and Spain and 4 or 5 places in Italy, including Taormina and Sicily. And on other cruises that I went on representing Hemmings to our readers, we went to places including Jamaica, Mexico, Costa Rica, Panama. You ever get a chance to go through the Panama Canal, do it. It is an incredible experience. It's as much an engineering marvel as anything you'll ever see in your life. But I got a chance to learn that in part because I interacted with people that I just happened to meet on the street or in a bar or in a restaurant or in a shop. I'm trying, I guess, not to be an arrogant or boorish visitor to their country. I mean, I'm a guest, and I need to show them respect. And I think that's one way you can really do it, is by trying to at least express an interest in learning the way that they speak. What is an idiom? What's a common greeting? You know what I learned in France? Anytime you walk into business, what's the first thing you say?
Tell us.
Bonjour.
Oh, just bonjour, just hello.
Yeah, that's customary.
Okay.
If you don't do it, they're going to be offended, or they're going to think you're arrogant. I'll use that word.
No kidding.
Yes, indeed.
So, Jim, tell us something. I mean, you've told us a few things, but I don't know who doesn't know what. Tell us something nobody knows about you.
I used to be a competitive bird watcher.
Oh, my goodness.
Yep.
How do you compete? Bird watching.
In my particular case, at the newspaper I worked with 3 guys who were interested in bird watching, unaware that they were working with other people who were also interested in bird watching. And I forget how they all found out, but I ended up getting roped along with a trip to them, and we went from southern New Jersey down to the Blackwater National Wildlife Refuge, which is kind of like about halfway between Annapolis and Ocean City in Maryland. So it's on the Maryland Eastern Shore. It's a nesting place for bald eagles. That's the place I saw my first bald eagle. I've seen many others, including about 10 miles away from where I'm sitting right now.
I'm in Palm Harbor, Florida, about 20 minutes north of Clearwater. We can see a bald eagle from time to time.
Okay, well, I saw one, if you're familiar with the real estate here or the geography, I saw one. He was actually on the ground. I saw him along Pioneer Trail in New Smyrna Beach. And it's actually a pretty thickly settled area, so I was pretty surprised to see him there. But we went from there on another trip. We went to a place called Hawk Mountain, which is at the border of Schuylkill and Berks County in Pennsylvania. So this is kind of west of the Lehigh Valley and north of Reading, basically along I-78. little bit north of there. Beautiful country. Again, saw many, many raptors. It took us about an hour and a half to climb to the top of the mountain. Competitive bird watching's most prominent event takes place every year in Cape May, New Jersey, at the very tip of the bottom of the state that protrudes into the Atlantic Ocean.
How do you keep score? Like, here's the 10 birds you got to see and check off when you see them?
Well, at Cape May is a stopping off point to several hundred species of migratory birds, more than any other place in the Western Hemisphere. When I went there, it largely worked on the honor system. It was just considered really bad form to suggest you saw a bird when you, in fact, you hadn't. So a lot of people, in addition to saying what they had seen, they would also describe where they saw it and how they recognized it, which may be by its call or by its plumage or something like that. The larger point here for me is that if you want to be a journalist, a reporter, that is fabulous training, because it is really going to sharpen your visual acuity. It is going to markedly improve your ability to take in detail in a very compressed time frame. You may only have a burst of feathers in front of your field of vision that you have to identify on that brief sighting. It's really good training for a reporter. It really is, because it forces you to be observant.
Well, you'd mentioned that cheating is bad form. I mean, I think cheating is always bad form, whether you're writing down, you're skipping a few strokes on your golf score, or cheating's bad, right? Cheating's bad. But really, if it's honor system, somebody in theory could just say, I saw this, and here's where I saw it, and here's how I mean, has there anyone ever been caught and dishonored? Like, is that a thing?
Have I ever been? No. Has anybody else been? Probably, yeah. I guess for me, and I can only answer for myself, your word is really what you are. It's not a thing. It's not a commodity. It's your being. It's your core. Again, speaking for myself, I wouldn't want to put myself in a position, especially deliberately, that would cause people to question what I am. I mean, I kind of like going through life knowing, secure in the knowledge that other people think I'm reliable. I can complete certain tasks within a certain time frame and do them correctly, that I can be relied on when I promise to do something. Yeah, it partly flows from that.
Amen.
I wouldn't say it's the overriding determining factor, but yeah, that kind of formed my worldview to a degree.
Rest assured, Jim, I'll be making a clip of this and showing it to my sons, who I'm very proud of, and I don't have any problem in that department, but I always love reinforcing it.
I bet they're proud of you, too.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. I hope. That's how we live, right? Try to be the example. What would you want us to know about you?
That I am what I present myself as, a good journalist who worked really hard and who respected the craft and still respects it as a foundational element of our society, and as a right that people died in combat so I could practice that right. I mean, I take that very seriously. When you're working as a journalist, I mean, obviously what unites us is an enthusiasm for cars and motorsports, but most of my professional existence, especially during my newspaper days, during that time period, cars were really something I did on the periphery of my daily duties, which frequently involved writing about crime and government. I'm fond of saying that I spent a lot of time and a lot of energy writing about the consequences of other people's stupidity. You're still, even if somebody has done something that ends up with them being removed from political office or facing criminal charges or potentially being injured or injuring somebody else, you're still dealing with somebody else's reputation as one of your commodities. I mean, it's something that you are presenting to the rest of the world. And that's a lot of power. and it also carries an enormous amount of responsibility. Words and thoughts and the way that they are expressed really matter. They're really important, and they have enormous consequences. And I always tried to be aware of that in everything I said and I did. I mean, you have through your work the power to really elevate people, and I've tried to do that when it was warranted, but you also have the power to destroy them. You can throw a lot of weight. You need to do it very judiciously.
Did you ever feel justified in tearing down a life?
No, I reported the facts as they were presented to me to the best of my ability. If a person's reputation was destroyed, it was usually, in fact, almost exclusively through their own actions. What I tried to do, if I can just give you an example here of what I tried to do, it's very easy to be sophomoric and sensationalistic, especially when you're covering crime or official misconduct. Newspapers and other forms of media have leveraged that, I'll use that word, for a great many years, going back really to the rise of the daily newspaper in this country. And what I always endeavored to do is try to explain the underlying forces or causative factors that led to whatever calamity resulted from them, in the spirit of saying, hey, don't do this because this is how it can get you in trouble. Or to tell a reader, hey, this particular type of individual is out looking to victimize you. Here's how to spot them. One day, I had a reader of my newspaper call the police and turn in a couple of individuals who turned out to be crooked would-be contractors who were basically targeting elderly people and offering to resurface their driveways. They probably snared about 20 or 25 victims for at least $500 a piece that those people couldn't really afford to lose. What I did was sat down with the detective and came up with a step-by-step scenario of how one of these people are going to approach you and pitch it to you and pitch their so-called services to you, which is obviously bogus, and what you need to look for. The day that story ran, a person who subscribed to my newspaper was reading the story when those two guys pulled up in the driveway of an elderly lady living across the street from him. He called the cops. It turned out the one guy was a prison escapee. He escaped from prison in upstate New York. And he was going around with this other dirtbag and figured they'd get some easy money. Say, okay, yeah, give me $500, I'll resurface your driveway. And then they just take off. They slept in jail that night, thanks to me.
Good job.
That's a good feeling. And that is my definition of responsible journalism. Anecdotally, to be sure, but that's kind of where my mindset's always been.
Okay. But Jim, when you talk about just presenting the facts, and you're a journalist and you're in the newspaper business, not just car feature magazines, how do you feel today about mainstream media?
I don't know how that's defined, honestly. I mean, I have my own choices as for information sources, and they're, in most cases, they're the same ones I've been using most of my, not just professional life, my life period. I think there's a lot of intellectual laziness on behalf of both some of the people who generate that content and some of the people who consume it. I also believe that as a society, and to some extent as a profession, as an identifiable profession, people have largely lost the ability to differentiate between news and infotainment. That line was blurred for a considerable amount of time before. I'm not sure it even exists anymore. News should not be entertainment, and I don't really think it should be a money-making enterprise, which a lot of purveyors, especially in the broadcast world, have clearly managed to do and do very successfully. If you look at how many people watch or consume at least televised news during a natural disaster, an election, a political scandal, a war, yeah, the ability exists there to monetize it. What people, I think, in that world are trying to do, more so in the print world, is to try and retain the audience that they can attract with breaking news events and keep them interested and keep them from tuning away to whatever they were watching ordinarily. To track that audience, you have to hold their interest. And I think that in many cases, it's being done by glitzifying the news, by turning it into a he said, she said conflict, sometimes in the guise of fairness. There's a bromide that's out there kicking around that to seek the word of a Nazi on a story about Jewish people just in the spirit of attaining balance is kind of bogus. And I believe that some of that is just done to generate conflict and stand as entertainment to the audience. I don't watch a lot of TV news. I really don't. I read a few different newspapers, not all of them from the United States, and a few different magazines. And I generally stay away from social media and a lot of like mass consumption information sources such as that, because I just don't think it's reliable.
If you feel like, since we're talking, there's something you wish you brought up, tell me.
The only thing I would say in conclusion is I'll say the same thing to your listeners that I said to Larry O'Donoghue's and Buzz McKim's and anybody else that's allowed me to be in a position similar to this. Is I think it's important to show gratitude every once in a while. I don't know, maybe if I focused on some different things in my journalistic career, maybe I could have gone to work in Washington or work in New York City or work for a think tank or something like that. But it's not really what I wanted to do. My parents offered to send me to law school, full ride, no questions asked. I didn't want to do it. This is what I wanted to do. I wanted to write about topics that interest me, hopefully do it well, hopefully interest some other people in the time. And in doing so, hopefully express some gratitude to the people in my past who helped to bring me to this point. I'll never lose sight of that. I'd like it if you could share that with your audience. I owe a debt of gratitude to a lot of people, and I'm at a point in my life where I want to express that publicly.
Jim, why not? How much better could the world be if everyone had that thought to not for show's sake, not for a show to express gratitude, but to it's like two pieces hand in hand. It's making amends where you should make amends. It's expressing gratitude where you should express gratitude. Sincere. If you could really describe why.
I'm very lucky. I'm very lucky to have been able to do what I did, and I'd like the world to know that I appreciate that.
This has been Jeff Stearns, Connected Through Cars.